Why don't we get started? My name is Andrus. I'm the Cumberland Head Taxpayers Association, Inc., which has begun around March of this year. And I basically wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts on why we got started back in March. There's been some issues that have been going on, specifically in the town of Plattsburgh, going back 3-4 years. One of them is it started out with the sewer project that they tried to force on the Cumberland Head residents, the public sewer. It turned out to be that they were using some very old costs, and by the time the project, if it had been finished, would have been tremendously expensive. It would have been a deposition for a lot of the residents. Many of the residents out here, I believe, at least from my analysis, there's quite a number of people who are retired, such as myself. I've been retired 10 years on a fixed income, on a pension, and not looking at any major increases in their income in the next 10 years or for the rest of your life. So people are struggling, and there's a lot of people who live in Champlain Park who are young families starting out, new homes, children looking for work, there's unemployment. And if I recall, on a national level, we're in the middle of a recession, a fairly serious one, so jobs are scarce. But going back, why we started, the sewer project was the first bomb that was dropped on us by the town of Plattsburgh. The most recent was the municipal lighting districts, combination of the municipal lighting districts. They have had 9 districts, independently districts, sanctioned by law, et cetera, with the commissioner in each district. We took those 9 districts and combined them into one district without any input from the residents in the entire town. In other words, they never consulted with myself or Ms. Blake or Craig Matthews or anybody who lives on the head who was not in the lighting district initially. So we're now all sharing the lighting district municipal sanction. They did this under the guise of what they say state law 171780. So we're going to be faced with a new tax on municipal lighting at some point in the near future, probably this year. We're also going to be faced with a new tax on the highway. That's going to be coming in. We're not sure what those numbers are going to be. We're going to be faced with a new tax on the fire department, big for this building, and our fantastic volunteer firemen, who nobody can chide them, and I think they do a marvelous job. I've always supported the volunteer firemen. But we're looking at continual taxing on the people within the town of Plattsburgh. The most recent fiasco is they bought 2 doormats, allegedly is what I hear, 2 doormats for $1,800. Now that could probably pay for a couple of semesters of college tuition, or high school education, or
20 years ago.
Yeah, that was one of my semesters. Okay, so the point is that this has been continuing on and on and on. It's a snowball effect. The town doesn't seem to have any consideration for the people who are the residents. And I say that, unfortunately, it seems to be true that every time the superintendent or some of the members on the board expressed a reference to us, the residents, it's always that, well, they're just pupils and we're the teachers. That sets a mindset of we're the underlings and they're the overseers, that we are Joe Voter. I don't know who Joe Voter is, but we've been referenced by a few people on that board as Joe Voter. So there seems to be disdain towards and non-caring attitude towards the people who are residents. And I resent that personally. That's one of the reasons, well, 4 of the reasons, why I think we organized initially back a few months ago, including the Board of Education for Beacon County Schools, which we thought a number of things have been too graceful and helpful insight of Holly Sims and Johnson's, what's going on with Beacon County Central School Board. And there's a lot going on there too. So the thrust of this organization, Cumberland Head Taxpayers Association, Inc., is to monitor and create transparency in government, especially town government, which we have an effect on, and also on the educational system here in the town of Beacon School District. Those are the two main focuses. We have a website. It's www.cumberlandheadta.org. There's a lot of work that's been put on that website by Blake and Sims, etc. A lot of information on that website. You can go to it. We're looking for new members. I think right now we probably have approximately 22, 25 members. We're in the process of getting ourselves organized and built legally through laws. State law, there's always a state law involved, probably a federal law as well for 501c4. And we're in the process of doing it. So we were crawling back in March. We're starting to hit the toddler stage about now in August. And I figure we're going to be running by the time elections come around. This is also being videotaped. It will be on our website probably within a few days. And I think the turnout tonight is fantastic. We appreciate you being here, and I know the candidates appreciate this good turnout. We have two people with us tonight that were gracious enough to come here and talk to us about their potential as candidates for the 115th district, which is now the incumbent is Janet Dupre. Janet has expressed to us formally in writing that she cannot make it tonight. She is in Albany at a ethics committee meeting, and that's unfortunate. We would like to have her here. She may be here in the future, next month or two. Our two candidates is Karen Bisso, who hails from Long Island. You'll catch that accent every now and then when she's talking. Really cute. I like the accent. It's nice. And David Kimmel, who is a resident here. David lives currently in Kimmel. And David's formerly with has a lot of military experience and information technology experience, and I think is going to be a fantastic candidate. And Karen's background in special education, as well as she's also managed the campaign that David Kimmel had at one point in time. It was only a few years back. There's a lot of experience here, a lot of depth of knowledge, and a lot of concern and caring. And I heard Karen speak at the 4 o'clock meeting. She had a press conference over at McSweeney's on Route 3, and I'm very impressed by her concern for the residents and for the state of the economy, the state of New York, and the condition of our education system. So anyway, I'll be quiet. I'll sit down. I want to introduce first Ms. Karen Bisso, and we have some literature here as well that we can pass on to Karen. Thank you.
Assembly because I think people are tired of spin, deflection, and buzzwords. Spin like when they say that we worked hard into the night, but what it really means is we worked behind closed doors. Okay? Deflection like the whole Tier 6 idea. We're going to do massive sweeping pension reform, but then we find out 2 weeks later from the comptroller that we're not going to see any relief for that in 15 years. And then buzzwords like bipartisanship, which really in the state of New York means nothing more than you do for me, but I do absolutely nothing for you. So I just want to kind of analyze one of those things briefly, and then I want to talk a little bit about what I've been doing for the last 7 months. And I'm really here to listen to all of you. And that's a part of what it is that I've been doing in my entire campaign, is traveling all over the 115th Assembly District. And I've attended actually in excess of 70 events myself. But I'll get to that in just a moment, okay? Bipartisanship, I just want to speak to that for just a moment. You know, bipartisanship, I believe, starts on Long Island, it ends in Albany, and we never see it north of the Thruway. I mean, for example, people who are in the Bronx, do they really have a vested interest in outdoor wood boilers? Okay? Or let's talk a little bit about registration and licensing for our woodsmen. Okay? I mean, do people in Queens really have to worry about that? No. And when they close a prison in Manhattan, does it decimate their economy? No way. our economy when it happens here. So for that reason and that reason alone, I believe bipartisanship is actually nothing more than negotiating your own surrender for upstate New York. And so one of the reasons why I want to go down to the State Assembly is because I really want to work hard on bringing our culture there and the message that we have. Everything I'm going to listen to, all of you speak about tonight, it's going to be my job to have your voice travel in that direction versus what I think has been happening, which is that the message is coming at us. And I really think the direction of the message needs to change. It needs to go from us to them. So a little bit of background about what I've been doing over the last 7 months. I made a pledge on the day that I announced my candidacy that I would spend the next 237 days traveling to visit as many of the 130,000 constituents in the 115th Assembly District that I possibly could. And I did that while I was a working teacher and a small business owner. Gratefully, I mean, right now I'm off for the summertime, so it makes it a little bit easier, so I've been happy for that, a little bit of respite. But what I've been doing is I've been traveling during the week to Clinton County and the eastern part of Franklin County, and then on the weekends I was going to the western part of Franklin County and the eastern part of St. Lawrence County. So the breadth of this district takes us roughly an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours wide. So it's a bear. But here's what we've been able to do. We contacted coalition groups all over the district, and we've met with farmers, we've seen feedlots, we've actually gone and sat with county managers, we've sat with county legislators and listened to their concerns about Medicaid. I've had the benefit of actually going in and speaking with the commander of Fort Drum, which is not in this district, but he is really interested in using the skill set of wounded warriors and bringing them to this area to work with our youth and mentoring them. So that was really powerful. How did I get to meet him? I ended up at the first military appreciation event, which happened in St. Lawrence County, where I hooked up with a gentleman from FishCap. FishCap is designed to actually bridge all of the talents of Franklin County and St. Lawrence County together in order to increase tourism in the area. We were privy to that meeting. We sat down with the Chamber of Commerce. We met with local business leaders to try and put all of that together. That was tremendous for us. We've been to senior citizen housing. We've been to 3 fire stations, North Bangor, Morrisonville, and Brushton. Try and get a little bit of a flavor of everything. We've gone through St. Lawrence County and we've sat with people at the farm level. We've gone to different, like I said, feedlots. We've been to Boys and Girls Association events. We've done gun shows, car shows, antique car shows, bike shows, and tractor pulls, okay, which has been tremendous for me because many of those things were the first time I ever experienced them. We don't have those on so that's been tremendous. We actually went with the Parishville ATV group and we did a 45-mile run with them on their ATVs, and that was a blast to Weller Mountain. So as you can see, what I'm talking about is just little coalitions of people. We sat with fish and game enthusiasts. We've been with Sportsman Federation groups in Franklin County and Clinton County. We knocked on 1,400 doors in order to talk to people. And all of it is exactly what's happening right here tonight, which is tremendous, okay? It's groups of people getting together who have a vested interest, and then we're just having conversations, and I've been so blessed to just be privy to this information so that we can construct the message that we need to have in order to deliver it to Albany. So anyway, I'm excited to be here this evening. That's a little bit about my background and then what I've been doing over the last 7 months. I have 27 days left before the primary, and I promise you that I will not let up. I'm going to continue to attend events. We're going again tomorrow night. Tonight's an event. We're spending all weekend in Tupper. We have things going on for the next 27 days, and I pledge to you that I will continue to walk door to door to talk to as many people as I possibly can. But I'm so excited to hear what you have to say tonight, so I'll do my best.
Hold the question a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I'll introduce David Kimmel so that he can tell you his background himself, some of his history, and why he's qualified to be a candidate. So David?
Thanks, man. Hi, everyone. Good to see you tonight. But 31 years ago, this month, I left my inner city home for good, and I embarked on my first military experience in the United States Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, I got to do everything you could ever imagine, the things most people dream of. I jumped out of airplanes, rappelled out of helicopters, climbed sheer cliffs. I spent a couple years in the Pacific, and in my second year on the island of Okinawa, I met the bride of my youth. My wife Cindy was here today. I have to bring her up because she's been very, very supportive of me as I run want you to know that you probably know Cindy's parents, Ron and Sharon Wood. I bet you some of you know Ron and Sharon. And so if you're wondering, yes, she used to be an elf. And actually, that's how I fell in love with her. I heard her sing, and that was it. It was all over with. And so after just 16 days of dating, I proposed and we got married, and that was in 1984. And we've been married for over 28 years. And Cindy supported me through some amazing experiences. After the Marine Corps, I spent 15 years in the Army. And I was a Marine's Marine and a soldier's soldier. I can tell you without any doubt in my mind that I have more leadership training and more leadership experience than any candidate in this race. We are in desperate need of leadership in Albany. It is grossly lacking. Ms. Dupree is not a leader. If she was, I wouldn't be around. And if she was, and the others in the assembly were, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in. I was a fortunate guy, because while we were raising our 3 beautiful children, who are all adults now, I got to serve in anti-terrorism. This shirt, this badge is a symbol of the unit I was in. It was an elite organization. Our duty was to respond to domestic attacks involving the use of weapons of mass destruction. I don't know if you've even heard of us, but it was a really awesome experience. And after being selected for that experience, we trained for 3 more years, and we got certified just days before 9/11. And we became the first team of our kind in U.S. history to respond to a terror attack on U.S. soil when we responded to 9/11 at the World Trade Center. And I bring that up for an important reason. I bring that up not because of what I saw on 9/11. If you can imagine what you saw on TV, it was even more amazing in real life. We deployed to Ground Zero. We had a very specific mission. It was very hard to do our mission while we were watching firemen and police we had trained with for 3 years digging for fellow officers where we did it. And our mission was to take samples of suspicious chemicals around the base of the World Trade Center to make sure that we hadn't been attacked by secondary devices, chemical and biological weapons. Early in the morning of the 12th, we left the city. We knew we were going to get called right back. We went about an hour north, and we got gasoline for our generators. We cleaned our equipment. We tried to build a shut-eye, that didn't work. And about 11:30, we got called back into New York City. I'm running because of what happened on the 12th of September. Because unlike the 11th, in which all the streets leading down to the pile were lined with police officers, something new was taking place on the 12th. At first, it was just ordinary citizens walking up to a street corner, standing next to police, and waving at us. And then people started showing up, and they had boxes of water bottles, bags of food. We would return again and again to Lower Manhattan as responders. And again, the people of New York were there to help the responders, to serve the people who were digging in the rubble. Bags of water bottles were replaced with pallets of water bottles. Ordinary citizens came out in droves. And I learned one of the most important lessons of my life, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. You see, New Yorkers know exactly what to do when the chips are down. We know exactly what to do to pick the pieces back up. And this same thing is true of our business owners, our families. And so when I see 10% unemployment, when I see that we were at our lowest in a decade in unemployment, and when this Dupree took office, we went from 5% to 6 years later is 10%. in a steady upward trajectory. I know it's not the people of New York that are the problem, but it's the politicians of New York that are the problem. I'm running because the people of New York are the best people in the world, and if we're unfettered by the nonsensical politics of Albany, we would be unstoppable. I am convinced that we could be a force of economic power that the world has never seen. I am convinced that New Yorkers could be a force of good like the world has never seen. But we have to do something about self-serving politicians who think it's their God-given right to stay in office until they're ready to leave, even if they've already retired like Mr. Bree has. I'm running because of you. I'm running because of my belief in you. I'm running because of my belief in America. And I have to tell you something else. We should not be sending anybody to Albany who doesn't have a plan. It is absolutely essential that the next assemblyman going to Albany knows what they're about. They have a plan. It's something that is feasible. It's something we can accomplish together. I have a plan. It's a good plan. My campaign has been focused on jobs and the economy. The American people, the people of New York, are looking for jobs. They want a strong economy. And so I'm focusing on it. You've said that's what you want, and that's what I'm focusing on. And so here's my plan. The first thing I want to do is focus on transportation. We have great blacktop roads, but even now, even this week, we have another bridge just south of here that is condemned. Businesses are closing, jobs are going away, because the state can't get its act together. Now it's not highway superintendents, it's not even the Department of Transportation. It's politicians who know when roads need to be rebuilt and don't plan for it. So I have an innovative plan to fund transportation and an innovative plan so that local decision makers can do something when politicians in Albany are sitting on their duffs. I want to focus on communication. I want to tell you emphatically tonight that as a communication expert, I am intent on bringing pervasive, redundant broadband to the North Country. No more shallow promises, no more grants right around election time. I want to get it done, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to fund it. Transportation, communication, here's how I fund it. Medicaid. In New York State, we pay twice as much for Medicaid in California, and we insure half as many people. We are number one in Medicaid. California is number two. Everybody's far behind. How on earth are we doing that? I'll tell you how. While you're struggling, as Jack said, to pay for your property taxes, we're using Medicaid, which we pay for in New York with property taxes, to give kids in the Bronx cell phones. We must reform entitlements in New York State. I want to start with Medicaid. I'm committed to this. The New York Times reported in 2005 that 5 to 10% of our Medicaid budget is fraud, waste, and abuse. That is billions of dollars every year that we lose to fraud, waste, and abuse. I want to recoup that. Even on the low end, some trade unions say that we're only losing 3% of fraud, waste, and abuse. That's $1.5 billion a year. Are we going to look our children and grandchildren in the eye and say, I thought it was acceptable to let $1.5 billion a year go down the drain? How can we do that? We do not want to be the first generation in American history to pass this great thing that we have been given on to our children in worse shape than we got it. I am committed to attacking Medicaid fraud, waste, and abuse. Now, I'm no dummy. I recognize that right now in Albany, there are people who think it's a good idea to actually add more entitlements. They're out there. I recognize that. I'm not one of them. So, what I plan to do is I plan to go after fraud, waste, and abuse by building, yes, a coalition. Yes, a bipartisan coalition, because as it turns out, Democrats and Republicans are willing to do something about fraud, waste, and abuse. They're just doing a poor job of it. Our current governor started a task force when he was Attorney General. That task force hasn't reported on its results since 2008. Here's what I know about task force. I know a lot about task force, being a former member of anti-terrorism. If you're not measuring the results of something like that, you have no way of knowing what to change and what's working. I want to bring some sense to this program. And I believe I can do it. I believe I have the leadership experience to build a bipartisan coalition. I want to use this as a stepping stone to reform other entitlements. Because every entitlement in New York State has a significant percentage of fraud, waste, and abuse. Name an entitlement. Significant. The money we're losing is in the billions. So that's the third thing on my agenda. The fourth is something that businesses have been telling lawmakers for a decade, and it's fallen on deaf ears. In New York State, we have 57 health insurance mandates. You know what a health insurance mandate is? A health insurance mandate is something the state says you must include in your health insurance if you want to play in New York State. This puts us in the top 4 health insurance mandate states in the country, which makes us one of the top 4 most expensive health insurance states in the country. Business owners, 67% or more in New York, have said for over a decade that this puts us at a competitive disadvantage. We cannot attract new businesses, we cannot attract new quality employers, and we're losing people because of this problem. And so I have developed a plan to do something about health insurance mandates. And it's a plan that will work. I recognize that many of the people in Albany have sponsored health insurance mandates. Ms. Dupree, for instance, number 57. Guess who sponsored it? Janet Dupree, the latest health insurance mandate. But I know that some of these people actually meant well. And so what I want to do is I want to change the way we do health insurance in New York so that every person, every company that provides health insurance in New York has to provide a baseline of half of the mandates. And then they have to offer at least one package that includes a portion of the remaining mandates. In addition, they have to offer at least one Cadillac plan that includes all of them. What this will do is this will push health insurance back into the marketplace where it belongs. It'll make it more competitive in the market, it can be done, and it will lower the cost of health insurance, allowing us to compete. And our business owners have been asking for it for a decade. I'm going to listen to others that turn a deaf ear. And finally, I think it's absolutely essential that the next assemblyman has an empire-sized vision. We're the Empire State. No more half-stepping, no more marking time. We are the Empire State. We are the state that recovered from 9/11. We are the state that built the Brooklyn Bridge. We could be unstoppable, and we should be. Well, we have to send somebody to Albany who has both focus and a vision. These 4 things, plus the overarching concept of an empire-sized vision, are my plan. I invite you to scrutinize it and determine for yourself whether or not it will help create an environment in which jobs and people will prosper in New York. Thank you.
Thank you. What we'd like to do now is add questions directed from all you folks to one or both of the candidates. We can say good questions for, and maybe we get a response from the other candidate. So let's open it up for questions and identify yourself, who you are, and go ahead.
Debbie Pasno, and I'm going to start with you, Ms. Bisso, but actually I'd like input from both. As a teacher, 26-year veteran, you're well aware of what many of these unfunded mandates are doing to our school systems. We have another one coming down the pike shortly about computerized testing, and schools are being given no assistance with getting geared up for this mandate, but it's going to be enforced, just like all the others. And school budgets are stretched to the limit. In our particular school, we're starting out next year already with a $2 million deficit. And we've laid off almost as many teachers as we can lay off without making ourselves completely unable to function. So my question to you is, how are you going to bring your experience to Albany? What practical, enforceable ideas do you feel that you have that you can be able to relate to your colleagues to help us to get relief from some of these mandates?
Terrific, great question. Thank you very much. I've sat with principals and superintendents, and I actually spent quite a bit of time with a couple of superintendents, and I gave them a questionnaire, and I asked them, and the reason I did that was because the people who are on the front lines, the people who do this every day, like you, like me, especially like the superintendents, they know best where there are problems within the system. So instead of everybody from the outside looking to try and fix education, I kind of thought that the best way would be to go into education itself and ask them, how do you think we can fix this? So I sat with the superintendents after I gave them this interview, and then I kind of followed up with some questions, and they came up with some really interesting things themselves. First of all, they believe that the state is completely out of sync with what it is that we do on a daily basis and the volumes of information that they collect from so many different sites all over the entire state. Two of the superintendents that I spoke with actually believe that we're over-superintended, okay? They believe we have too many superintendents. They themselves said to me, do you know that we have way too many superintendents? It's too costly for every single school district. The one that I sat with said to me, do you know that I could probably take Peru, Plattsburgh, Saranac, and Beekmantown, and I could do all of that work myself.
He's
I said, and he wasn't the only one. Ken Kringle from Saranac said exactly the same thing. I was shocked. We all know that there aren't great candidates for superintendents out there either. I mean, what we're really looking at is, I'm sorry, but I've been in the interview process. We have a problem in this state in attracting good people because of the problems in the state. You know, so I think that was a fabulous suggestion. He also talked about the fact that state is so out of sync with what it is that we do that, like this past year, they ended up wanting us to have testing while we were on vacation. How can state ed not know that the state calendar, is out and that we're going to require testing while the kids are on April break? I mean, that kind of ridiculousness, they said, absolutely has to stop, and that's because there's a huge disconnect between the people that are in state ed down there and the people who are actually on the front lines here. I believe, as in exactly what this meeting is, that the best of everything happens at the local level. Okay, we know best how to take care of a lot of our issues. I mean, if you think about how school systems were actually started with boards of education, they were the ones responsible for levying a tax based on the programs that they thought were fit for their kids. The programs they designed to make sure that their students had what it was that they needed. And as we've added the state into that equation in order to have things happen, they can increase mandates, making us do things, and then they funnel some money to us at the same time. Well, now it's happening again at the federal level. And I don't know if you guys experienced the same thing we did in Plattsburgh, but they withdrew so much funding from us last year that forced our district to actually apply for grants. And the two grants that we applied for were minuscule, $50,000 apiece. But what we gave up by signing on to those grants was enormous. What we gave up was we signed on to President Obama's education initiative to try and nationalize our education system with Race to the Top. And the moment that we did that, we then had to play into that system, and we had to provide them with everything that they needed. They're looking at actually changing something that's, you guys know this, core state standards. And when I first was approached with core state standards, I mean, it sounds like a lovely word, this word statement. So everybody thinks, oh, it's great, the state's going to recreate its own standards. It's not. We're going to have the same standards as Montana and every other state and every other school district that is brought into this program. What we're doing is we're backing our way away from the vested interest that we have in our own communities in touching the product that we put out every single day. And the farther away that you get from that, the more a personal agenda you have to fill. And that's what I think is happening with the state and with the federal government. So I believe that the superintendents have a ton of solutions. I believe teachers have a ton of solutions. And while I was at the Clinton County Fair, I was approached by 2 bus drivers who had incredible solutions. So really, if we take a look at they could probably do a whole lot of good for us figuring out how we can even overhaul our own and police ourselves, and then kind of extrapolate that out across the state. But you're absolutely correct that unfunded mandates are killing us. And Ken Crinkle provided me with a piece of paper that just had, it was like 3 pages long of everything that just happened in the last few years. And after Governor Cuomo came on, he said no more new unfunded mandates. And within the first couple of months, we had a page of them. That happened. So,
We remember an organization that spent a lot of time on the New York State Education Department. To be frank, my impression is that they're just useless and part of the problem.
Yes.
We had no success dealing with it.
right. And it's not just that, right? It's not, I mean, think about Plattsburgh has a unique situation, because we are the county hub, basically. So what we end up having a problem with is we have all those kids who come from outside area school districts, and then they plant themselves in the city schools because that's where all the services are for the area. And then they show up and they get their services for one day, they walk in and they sign on the dotted line, and then we never see them again. And then we get hit with all sorts of state-based problems because our dropout rate is high. We never had a chance to even touch the student in the first place. So I think that it's not just a problem with the schools, it's also a problem with the community handling its own. And so what we ended up doing was bringing in all the community agencies, because again, everything happens best at the local level, because we don't do this every day. And we sat down and we tried to come up with ideas on how we're going to solve our own problem before the state made us do it. And it was so effective. It was wonderful to participate in that process. And so we had a mental health there, we had a justice system there, we had social services, and we all worked together on the solutions that we could come up with. I hope I answered your question, but I don't want to take any more time.
David, you want to respond? Deborah, I appreciate the question. My opinion, first of all, that we have to do something about unfunded mandates. No question about it. And so one of the first things I want to do when I go to the assembly is I want to introduce legislation to outlaw unfunded mandates constitutionally. That's a 2-year process. We'd have to vote on it in the first year, vote on it again, and send it to the people for a vote. I'm willing to do that work. It must be done. Every time somebody runs for office, they start talking about unfunded mandates, and yet the incumbent herself has supported unfunded mandates. The governor has supported unfunded mandates, and they're just kicking the can down the road. I'm willing to do that work. The other thing is that we have to introduce legislation to begin to reduce the number of unfunded mandates on the books. We have to. We have to identify those that are most vulnerable and pass legislation so that the state will fund them. I'm committed to that process. That's a very distinct thing that I want to do when we get to Albany. The other thing is that we spend a lot of time bad-mouthing teachers, but I'm convinced that most teachers, like most people in most businesses, are good. And like any other business, there are a few bad apples. And that's it. And what do? We develop programs that basically take on a lot of good people to address just a few bad apples. Rather than doing that, I want to reform state ed. And I believe that state ed is one of the biggest parts of the problem in education, and I think that the local decision makers have a much better grasp on what's going on. This year, Governor Cuomo supported something called APPR. It twisted the arms of a lot of people. Anybody know what APPR is? Yeah. APPR requires every school teacher to do something. It's a 48-page evaluation of teachers. Listen, I have to tell you, when I hear nonsense, I have to call it out. Ms. Bisso wrote a letter to the editor just a couple of weeks ago in which she said that she opposed APPR and therefore wouldn't accept her union's endorsement. And yet, this year, in the Malone Telegram, Ms. Bisso proudly proclaimed that she was in favor of APPR. Now, what happens when every teacher in the state is affected by a law and the state doesn't fund it? What's that called? Anybody? It's called an unfunded mandate. Ms. Bisso is already on record as supporting this largest unfunded mandate for 2012. I want you to know I will not support unfunded mandates. I cannot be tricked into them to later have to reverse myself. Unfunded mandates are really hurting our schools. We have to address them. That's what I'm committed to.
Thank you.
Next question?
Hi, I just have a question that Ms. Bisso brought up, but that question was initiated. Vermont's been talking about doing what they call these county superintendents for over a decade. And one of the fears that they've had is that what you're really going to do when you remove a superintendent from each school district, the next in line building principal, whatever they're going to turn, is going to gather more responsibility, and subsequently is going to require more money. So what you're really going to do when you have these overriding superintendents is basically going to create another layer of bureaucracy and subsequently more money as well. Do you have any fear with that?
Well, I think that the point that I was trying to make is that not so much that I agree with what it was that he said, but the point is that they have a right to say it. They have a right to organize as a unit. This is what they do every day. And try to put together what they believe to be a good, common sense plan on how to take care of the situation. And I was just relaying one of the items that the superintendent said to me. So whether or not that would be effective, whether or not it would create those extra layers of bureaucracy, I think that their goal would be to make sure that they save money and that they didn't create additional problems. And then I also would like to go on the record and say that I did not ever say that I supported APPR. My statement to the Malone telegram was, and this is it, however they printed it is different. I live this is what I do every single day. My statement was an overhaul needed to happen, but you did not need to take it from what little was happening to the Cadillac of everything and 96 items that teachers have to be evaluated on a yearly basis. It's an absolute bear of a system. And what it's going to do is place amazing amounts of work on principals who are now already talking about the 10 hours plus per evaluation that it's going to take per staff member. They're already talking about asking for extra money. Or asking for extra administrators. So it has created an entire situation here. Not only am I not for it, I stood under a sign in Plattsburgh City School District's auditorium that said angry when we were asked to each go underneath the sign that best reflected how we felt about APPR. And you had places like neutral, at peace. I mean, those were the kinds of things that were presented to us. I stood under the word angry. And of course, got elected a representative to talk about why it was that I was angry. And I said, we have great people. And sadly, because some people might not have been doing the job that perhaps other people thought that they should be doing, we end up with this whole entire mess of a system that's going to be costly. I don't understand how it's going to be accomplished in the course of a year. Our administrators are having a hard time now evaluating teachers and being done by the end of the school year. So I just want to go on record and say that I am not for APPR.
Great, thank you, Karen. Betty?
Our government, from the federal on down, are engaged in venture capitalism, taking money that the taxpayers have paid because government has no money of their own, and giving it to business enterprise for whatever reason. Here in our area, there are economic development grants, and this grant and that grant to help start up businesses, small businesses in general. And most small, I think one would find that most small businesses without venture capitalism fail. And it has been the track record here in the town of Plattsburgh that most small businesses that are given these economic development grants fail as well. To me, that seems like we're throwing good taxpayer money away when the state is $9 billion in arrears. How do you folks feel about venture capitalism at the state level?
Can you answer this one first?
Go ahead.
I don't think that the state should be in the business of picking winners and losers in the private sector. And I think, as a businessman myself, I think that it would be very unfair if one of my competitors got money from the state, money that some of which came out of my pocket in order to compete against me. And that's how I feel about it. It's a bad practice. And it's really, we've seen it at a national level. And by the way, politicians often have no business sense whatsoever and make horrible choices when it comes to business investment. Yeah. What we have to start doing is we have to start treating the things that should be extra, icing on the cake, as extras instead of the sole inducements. About 2 years ago, we had the guy who took over the Empire State Development who stood up and said, we have such natural beauty and grandeur in the Adirondack, who would want to come here? Well, that's not the same as saying we're going to make it easier to do business. We're going to, in my case, I'm big on lowering health insurance mandates so that more people want to come here. That's not the same, is it? Instead of treating these things that should give us a competitive advantage as the sole reason for people to come, those should be what they're designed to be, icing on the cake. We need to create an environment in which our people and our businesses can flourish, and in most cases, that's going to involve letting the marketplace do the heavy lifting. Eric?
Thank you. I agree. I read the entire 94-page document from the Regional Economic Development Plan, and I went through each and every one of the items, and it was really shocking and chilling, and very telling, actually. Not only did they pick winners and losers, but then they also decided which people would get the jobs that were supposed to be created by those particular grants. And they weren't the best skilled people, they were the poorest people. So they had qualifiers within those grants that said that the person who was the poorest gets the job. Okay, so, and then I went back and I did a little bit of research on a couple of the housing development projects that they had, one of which that, yep, you did the same thing. And here it was millions and millions of dollars in Brooklyn to create. What they did was they took an old hospital and they made it into housing for the underprivileged. And they said that they were going to have 12 jobs as a result of that. It was $24 million to result in 12 jobs. And of those 12 jobs, they did not stay because they couldn't fill the apartments. So then they didn't need the very people that they had in the first place. So I'm of the philosophy that the market knows best. I'm of the philosophy that competition knows best. And when a business fails, another business will come in and take its place if there is a reason for it. And if the person does a good job of putting together a plan and taking a look at it. I mean, when I was younger, when my dad started a business, he didn't go for a grant, he went for a loan. And the great thing about a loan is you have a vested interest in the success of your business. This is nothing different than the housing crisis, where we ended up giving all sorts of money to people with zero down, and then those people walked away from those houses 2 years later when they couldn't afford them because they had no vested interest. They didn't lose anything. And that's what happens with these grants. And I completely agree.
More questions? John?
New legislation law that mentions about 1717 allows dissolution of towns without being subject to public referendum. And it also allows towns to consolidate and create new districts without a public vote, such as they did in Cumberland Head by putting them in a consolidated district, even though they were never in a lighting district. They were wanted to be in a lighting district, but now they're going to be in a lighting district and have to pay tax on that. Would you be in favor of, would you support this, or would you feel it's such a law?
You want to take turns with those things?
Absolutely, sure, I'd love to. I believe all best decisions are made at the local level. And the state of New York getting involved in how it is we operate and do business in the town of Beekmantown is difficult. And you're ending up with these problems right now as a result of that. The state of New York just passed supposedly 571 pieces of new legislation this year, and they were darn proud of it because technically they said it was the fewest pieces of legislation that have ever been passed since 1913. Well, 125 of them come across the desk of the governor right now, and I had somebody review every single one of those pieces of legislation. You would not believe how much time is spent at the state level voting on issues in the state assembly that are completely home rule. Okay? For example, they had several police officers in different places within Nassau and Suffolk County that actually were denied their pensions. The state assembly decided to give them their pensions back. Okay? They had a group of Muslims down on Long Island that actually they brought this bill in front of the state assembly where supposedly they paid too much in taxes. And now when you read the bill, you can't exactly figure out where it came from, but one can only deduce that maybe they're now claiming that where they were living is an actual house of worship and they shouldn't have had to pay taxes. The state assembly voted on that. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is that I believe that best decisions are made at the local level. I also believe that the state should not be making decisions about local issues. You should have the ability to make that decision yourself, and it should have done a referendum. And it wasn't, and that was wrong. And it happens at the state level all the time. I think that if we go to the state assembly, people should be voting on issues that affect the entire not specific geographic regions. Those should be left to the specific geographic regions. So that's
John, part of the problem that we have is that we have lawmakers who actually support things so that they can run to the constituents and say, look what I've done, and they don't read the bills. I understand that was the case with Ms. Dupree and the unintended consequences that you're going to taxes. The thing is, we should never have a situation in America where people are paying for services they're not receiving. And that's true whether it's being crammed into a lighting district or whether it's Saranac Lake, in which a number of people think it would be a good idea to be a city. And because they're paying taxes to municipalities that don't get as many services in return. As I recall, as an amateur historian, that's why we fought the Revolutionary War. Taxation without representation is a no-brainer. The other thing too, John, is that when we fail to address this huge problem of unfunded mandates, we end up with municipalities struggling to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. And they're practically begging for creative ways to put the numbers together. I think that this is a failure of leadership, and I think it falls squarely in the lap of the State Assembly. When we had the property tax enacted, we should have seen significant mandate relief. Because we didn't, we're going to see more of municipalities trying to be creative, to pay their bills and stay under the cap. It's a leadership problem. The solution is to get rid of bad leadership. In this case, in Cumberland.
Dave, you say you're so adamant about understanding unfunded mandates.
John Farmer, I got military.
You said that you were so adamant about being against unfunded mandates.
Yes.
But yet, you sitting on the town planning board, the state passed a law making training mandatory for planning boards and such.
Yeah.
But they also said if you didn't want it to be mandated, you could pass a waiver. The town board chose not to pass a waiver, so like yourself and other people could go to New York City on the taxpayers' dime.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
So don't say you're against mandates when you turn around and take advantage of them and they're trucking off to New York City.
Oh, John, John is your typical pile of malarkey, you know. Listen, pal, the fact of the matter is, the town board has to ask for the waiver, and if they do not, then we are required by law to get the mandatory training. You know this, John. You know this to be so.
You know, and I know, that mandatory, that you passed the waiver and the mandatory training was not there anymore, and you know it can be done locally, not in New York City.
The town planning board is a volunteer board. They don't make town law. They don't pass town resolutions. If the town fails to act, we have no choice but to abide by the law. Once again, if we want to change things, we need leadership. But to blame somebody who must do something in response to the failure or inaction of others is absolutely ludicrous. John, can you do better than that?
I'm just saying, don't state that you're...
It's real easy, John. I don't support unfunded mandates, but I do abide by the law. I'm still not on record as supporting unfunded mandates. We can go all night, but I'd like to hear what other people have to say.
Any other questions? Holly?
We talked a moment, Karen, about Tier 6 and that you weren't in support of it. It's going to be 15 years till any savings were recognized. There is a huge problem in this state with pension and the pension bond that's going to, it's kind of Social Security, it's other entitlements, all kind of the same pension is. What is your solution then to this problem? If Tier 6 isn't the solution, what is, and how would you handle it? And I'd like to hear.
Thanks, Helen. Tier 5 was actually agreed upon by the unions with Governor Patterson. There's minuscule differences between Tier 5 and Tier 6. So it was just kind of, for me, Tier 6 was more or less the governor being able to walk out and say, I just created something that develops sweeping pension reform. So, I think that we had some things in place that would have been nice to see how those transitions but we didn't have an opportunity to do that. I also believe that a huge issue here is the fact that we are losing jobs in the state of New York, and that if we increase our jobs and increase the number of people who are put back to work, and we decrease our Medicaid burden, because that's the best way to decrease the Medicaid burden, is to actually give somebody a job. And hopefully we would be able to increase revenues in the state of New York, and that would help. I don't have an actual plan at this point. I'm sorry, I didn't answer that question.
Holly, I think one of the most important things we can do in New York is focus on full employment. That's something I really support. I think that that should be a stated goal of leaders in Albany. In terms of Tier 6, my philosophy is different. The governor probably did it because he plans on running for president in 2016, and that's pretty self-serving and despicable. No problem with that one. My perspective is that, well, I mean, you know, it's about his, I mean, he's taking voice lessons, okay, so he doesn't sound like he's from Brooklyn.
There's nothing wrong with that. I never say that.
I have a nasal accent because of my child. It is what it is, but Holly, in my case, I would have supported Tier 6, because even though kicking it down the road 15 years is, you know, painfully poor performance, by the time it got to the floor, I would have fought for earlier implementation, no question, but by the time it got to the floor for a vote, the choices were no Tier 6, doing nothing to reform retirement, or something. Those were the choices. In this particular instance, that's a compromise I would have lived with, and I would have then worked to try to implement Tier 6 faster in the meantime. No question, 15 years down the road is painful. It is better in this case than not addressing the problem at all. That's my opinion.
Can I just follow up real quick? Sure. I believe that you don't choose between a bad thing and a worse thing, or doing nothing and this thing so that you do something. I think that it was done quickly. It was tried to be snuck in and attached to other things, like when they tried to attach microstamping to the gun to our school lunch program, or the school aid program, excuse me, which would have pitted gun owners against children, which was horrible. Okay, we send these people to the assembly and to the state senate to do a job. We're paying the governor to do a job. I mean, they work for us. So why is it that they didn't have anything that was really realistic and would have solved the problem? I don't know, but I don't think that I would have put something that wasn't going to solve the problem out there just to have a vote on it so that we could then help our governor say, I did sweeping pension reform. I would have said no.
I guess my issue is that with the pension, with Tier 6 or Tier 5, we've got more people pulling from the pension system than we've got paying in.
Right.
There's
It's just like
mathematically, it doesn't work.
It's
And it's not sustainable, and it's not gonna last very much longer.
Well, it's funny because if you talk to Rod Sherman, because I want to tell you, he took me aside and he grilled me beforehand before this vote came down. He had an entire PowerPoint presentation for me. He sat me in the room. He said, and that's the head of the teachers union of Plattsburgh City School District, who's now retired. Anyway, he went through this massive presentation for me on why it is that the teachers' retirement system and the pension system is completely solvent. It's self-sufficient. It's not at stake. I mean, this is what he shared all of this. He had this enormous presentation. And so when Assemblywoman Dupree voted for this, because he was certain that she was voting against it. Certain, that's what he told me. So when it came out that she had actually voted for it, he was shocked. And so when I was presented by the teachers union and they asked me to fill out their questionnaire to receive their endorsement, which I declined, and I put that in the paper, I said to him, could you please explain to me why it is that you're now willing to stand behind her? I mean, what is it that you, who did all of this research and spent all this time telling me how bad this thing was, what did you miss that Assemblywoman Dupree did not? And basically what they told me, and when the PAC fund, when they called me and tried to get me to do this application, we asked them a question, and the response was this: it would have been far worse had she not stepped forward. And as a result of that, she was able to change a few things with the bill, and then she felt more comfortable with it, which to me was laughable.
Well, Holly, we've got a big problem. We're not admitting the truth, and it's right in front of our eyes. We're most cases, though. If we promote full employment, if we promote strong private sector economic policy, a lot of these things will iron out somewhat. However, I recently read, and I know this to be true, that there are a number of things in place right now that you might call sort of automatic in nature. And that's why I'm such a proponent of reforming things like entitlement, because right now we've got these ideas, these sort of automatic processes in place that aren't sustainable. So we had to do something at a very fundamental level, whether it's entitlement reform, as I support, or it's pension reform. There's no perfect solution to this particular problem, but I would, in this particular case, I feel that something is better than nothing. No question, it's a real small nod to a really big problem.
I was just going to follow one more thing, and then I'll be gone with the pension thing. So there's 3 municipalities in California that have already filed for bankruptcy. We've got Nassau and Suffolk County right now that have been taken over by a control board. We have Syracuse, New York right now that has asked for the bank, draw up papers to tell me what bankruptcy would look like. We're really close to the edge. It doesn't matter, it will take, I'm an economist, it's going to take 2 decades to get to full employment. The Titanic will have gone down by that point. So pension reform has to be done, and it has to be done now, along with entitlements, along with everything else that we've been kicking the can down the road for so long. So, you know, I guess I was just looking to see, does anybody really have an answer here? And the point is admitting the problem, and nobody's willing to say it's really a problem. It's math, it's a problem.
I'm on the record, this is my platform. It's a problem, it's a huge problem. Make no mistake about it, that's why it's such a big part of my platform. I've got 5 main points. This is one of them. You're right, we can't continue the way we're going. No question. No argument for me whatsoever. We need pension for, no question in my mind. Will full employment take a while? Sure, absolutely. I will tell you this. If we have people like Janet Dupree, who retire after they're reelected, and then swear back into the assembly and give themselves a 30% raise in doing so, that's not going to solve the problem. And that's exactly what she did. So one of the best things this district can do is get rid of Dupree.
Well,
Okay. Another comment?
just quick, we have another problem with Tier 6 though, because it extended the lifespan of every person in the public, section to 63 years old. So I can retire in 4 years at the age of 55, but at Tier 6, you're keeping your top people on that much longer and making it mandatory for them to. So now you're paying more money for those people who are making the most amount of money in the first place. So it has problems within it, and it's not going to solve the problem. So it should never have been passed. We were duped by the whole thing just for language. Something absolutely has to be done, but it was not that.
Jack,
And I would have voted against
may I
it.
please add something?
Okay.
By the way, I'm not trying to get your last word here,
That's okay.
but I hope that you don't mind me saying, because I know, I see your concern. And from your body language, this is driving you crazy. It's driving me crazy. I sure hope you appreciate when you're sitting up here, you have to be careful with body language. But to be honest with you, this is why it's on my platform. And I'm actually the only candidate who has laid out a concrete plan to begin addressing entitlement reform. I'm convinced we need a victory to build on. We have to do something that will help others to see it's possible. That's why I'm taking the approach. I hope you don't think that in any way I would minimize the importance of what you're saying. I mean, literally, we're that close.
Yeah.
Kids and grandkids.
Yeah, well, we looked at a lot of data, numbers, dollars, results for our school system, and that's our primary focus. I know there are lots of write-ups about unions, this and that, but we focused mainly on the school systems. And in New York State, college costs over $19,000 to educate, per year to educate a kid. The results are abysmal.
Horrible.
They're horrible. If
It's
you look
going
at
to college for less than that.
Yeah, if you look at the pie chart of where the money is going, it's not going to the kids. If you look just for Beekmantown, and we have Plattsburgh's data up there as well, as far as salaries and total pay, which is, stipends and all that, total compensation, the raises are pretty outrageous given this time, and I know it's contractual, and if you look at someone retiring at the average age of or average salary of $70,000, that's essentially an annuity, a guaranteed payout every year that would cost someone in the private sector $1 million, over $1 million to have something comparable. And pensions is only part of it. You have to look at healthcare. The healthcare that I'm not picking. We know the data for teachers, and I know it's probably the same for others, for public employees, is so out of alignment with what the private sector sees now. Plan A insurance, which is what the Beekmantown teachers are on, $50 deductible, maximum out of pay. Most employees, true. Most employees. 50 deductible, 150 max out of pocket. That is so out of. I have a good insurance plan. My they don't start paying until $800, and my max out of pocket is several thousand. But that's good.
Can I tag on to your point after?
Yes, I'm just saying that health insurance is out, and if you look at how these things get in, it's a consortium that chooses these things. Well, who chooses the consortium? There's so much inertia. It's collective bargaining that has enabled this to go on for so long. What can we do to stop this? Because it's crippling us. I'm about to the point where I say we need to file bankruptcy. That's the only way out of this.
Jack, no?
It-
No, but Jack will talk after.
Well, can I tag, because I think
It's
that
a- it's no
We
question.
got about 3 minutes to wrap those questions up.
Okay.
School system.
Okay, I want to tag on to that, because it's not pertaining strictly to school system. But, I see here that there's a reference to Medicaid as New York's Cadillac health plan. I would say that our New York State workers have Cadillac health plan. And yes, Medicaid is a Cadillac program, but there's so much, we hear all the time about state reform of Medicaid, state reform of entitlement, state reform. And we hear it, those are the buzzwords at campaign time, but there's nothing practical that's being done. And I just want to give you a brief scenario, and then I'm finished. But to me, one of the biggest problems with our entitlement programs is that we, the state, the government, federal, state, lock people into those programs. Because if you need the help and you go and you happen to qualify to get the help, once you get that help, you better not go out there and get a job that puts you 25 cents an hour or over too much, because then you're not going to make enough to make up the difference for what you're going to lose. You're going to lose your daycare assistance, you're going to lose your Medicaid, you're going to lose your housing subsidy, you're going to lose your heat. We don't have a system that not necessarily lets people right away flourish and move their way out of totally needing it. But if we could work on a system that allows people to level out and work their way out, and we don't do that. So it's an all or nothing, and you can't blame the poor people for that. That's the state that has a system that's so screwed up that it doesn't allow them to work their way out. And then we treat poor people like they're this pariah that causes the state all this misery. Well, we are locking them into that misery. So what's your answer to that?
I grew up in abject poverty, and here's my answer. Those programs don't work. They're primarily designed to keep liberals in office. That's my answer.
Well, when you have unemployment like what we have, what are some of those people supposed to do? There are people that legitimately need that help, and then they can't work their way back out.
No
That's what I'm saying.
question about it. And the fact of the matter is, I've never said let's cut all entitlements completely. I haven't said that. What I have said though is that we don't need to give kids cell phones in the Bronx and Medicaid while people up here are barely paying for the property taxes they're working for.
Mhm.
And so one of my solutions,
I
the
agree.
solution I offered was to reform Medicaid. And I want to begin by going after this multi-billion-dollar problem of fraud, waste, and abuse. We can do something about that. In truth, whether we save $5 billion there or by cutting entitlements, it's $5 billion saved. $5 billion less we have to pull out of property tax of people. And think about it. We could literally adopt the California code and cut our Medicaid in half and tie for first instead of being first in the country?
Karen, you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. The federal government requires X. New York has done X cubed, okay? If we just provided what the federal government required us to provide and didn't go X cubed, we would save a ton of money. And I've worked with these kids who take advantage of these programs, and many of them are critical. But I also work in the situation where we know that sometimes those kids take advantage of those programs, and so do their parents. But I want to get back to a couple of things, and I'll make it very quick. I believe we need to be a right to work state. And I think that's the only way we're going to take care of this situation, because collective bargaining is killing us. Okay, so I believe we need to and I have gone head to head with my union president over the last 25 years over this. And when I asked him, he actually approached me and he said, step aside. 2 years, step aside. Let Janet Dupree go on for another 2 years. And I said, excuse me? And he says, we're not going to endorse you. And I said, did I ask for your endorsement? And he said, no. And I said, just for giggles, why wouldn't you endorse me? I've been paying into the union for the last 26 years. I'm the only person who participates in the union. Why wouldn't you endorse me? And he said, because we always stay with the person that we endorse first. And I said, well, what else? What's the other problem? He says, ideologically, we don't agree. And I said, ask me a question about education. He says, how do you feel about collective bargaining? I said, not a question about education. Ask me a question about education. He says, what do you think about Tier 6? I said, Tier 6 is not a question about education. It is, how come every time I ask you to ask me a question about education, you throw the union at me? And he said, because the union is education. And I said, that's where we are different. And I said, he says, the union is the climate of education. And I said, when I walk in my room every single day and I close the door, sir, I am the climate of education. It is not the union. We have taken a pay freeze over the last 3 years. I'm okay with that. I'm paid a handsome salary, and I admit it. I said, we've also been sold a bill of goods as a population, because we were told 20 years ago that if we decreased teacher-student ratio, that somehow our product would be better. Guess what? Not better, right? Our product stinks. And I feel horrible about it. The product that I turn out now is nowhere near what it was 20 years ago. But we were sold a bill of goods that if we increased the number of teachers we put in the classroom, the kids would do better. Guess what that did? It grew the union. Okay? And now what we do is we take a pay freeze as a union to make sure we don't lose any union employees. So instead of the union keeping its integrity, and I believe there's a place for unions, but when they keep their integrity, they work for the people that are necessary. And we have people there who aren't necessary. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mudd, your question?
Yes. Since you work in the teaching environment, would you say that the majority of the teachers out there feel the same way you do, or not?
I have limited exposure to teachers, okay?
You have what?
Limited exposure. I have, my circle of friends that I deal with, okay? And I received, after my letter to the editor, where I declined the endorsement, seeking the endorsement of my union, I was being texted all over the place by teachers. Good job, Karen. So where I stand alone every single time, and that's the other thing, I've done this for years and I've stood alone. And I've stood up to the union in front of the entire population. We have 400 teachers standing there watching me do this. And I'm the only person who walks out of that room making these statements. But then I get the emails. Good job, Karen. Okay, I would have done it, but I'm afraid. And I'm not afraid.
of fear.
Right, and I'm not afraid. So I think there are many more who agree with me than you would think.
Yeah, I truly believe that, and I want to believe that. And I have family members that are union members, not teaching, but union members in other fields. And they absolutely hate the union.
Right. I've met so many
Because
people in this whole process who tell me that.
And in one situation, I have a brother that's worked for the union for a number of years, and they were losing their retirement. And the company took over their retirement from the union and their benefits to save that for the employees,
Right.
or they were lost. But I was curious about the teaching end of it.
I think that there are more. They're good people. They're great people. I mean, we have a wonderful group of people, but I really do believe there's a fear factor involved.
Yeah.
There really is, and I'm just not afraid.
We hear that too.
And David,
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. Any other questions?
you made a comment earlier that is key. And I don't get it with this government that we got. get us out of the situation we're in is jobs. The more people that work, the more revenue they have. There's two issues here. We not only need jobs, but we need, to the point you made earlier as well, leadership to control spending.
Yes, that's right. Mr. Mudd, I'll tell you something. One of the reasons that we've seen such a lack of leadership on the job, I mentioned a very real statistic. It's not something I conjured up. It comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Literally in 2006, we were at 5%. We've doubled since then. 6 years that Janet Dupree's been in office. But it's also taking your eye off the ball. The simple truth of the matter is, you are the reputation you build. I learned that in the military. One of my nicknames was MacGyver, because very early on I was the guy who could fix everything. Ms. Dupree is the go-to gal for every sort of liberal social policy there is. She doesn't have a reputation for caring a hoot about jobs. She doesn't put out press releases about job creation or the economy. And we get the results of double-digit unemployment and constantly rising employment. The truth of the matter is, we have to send a leader who's focused. In my belief, it needs to be focused on jobs and the economy. So I appreciate your comments here.
Just one other thing if I can.
Okay, quickly.
Diane Sawyer, and this goes back maybe a month ago, 6 weeks ago. I'm not sure how far. It hasn't been that long ago. She did a special report on some things that's taking place here in the United States. I'd just like to get your opinion. And what she talked about was there's a multi-billion-dollar bridge that's going to be built in California, and I think it's LA, I believe. There's a multi-million-dollar bridge, billion in California. Multi-million-dollar bridge, as I understand it, here in the state of New York. A multi-million-dollar bridge in the state of Texas. And there's another bridge someplace, I don't remember what state. This is my opinion. The moron that we have in office running this country right now gave the contracts to build these bridges to the Chinese. And as I understand it, they're going to have their employees come to this country, or their workers come to this country to build the bridges. What in the hell have we done?
You want me to comment now?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, you got about a minute.
Okay. Well, I'll try to do it in a minute. Okay. This is a reason why I'm focused on transportation. It's a critical infrastructure, and in actuality, if you look beyond the same roads that get paved every time there's an election, we've got a real problem. In New York, we are in the process of building the Tappan Zee Bridge. Everybody familiar with the Tappan Zee Bridge? It's about 6.5 hours south of here.
Is that the one she was referring to?
No, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar project.
Oh, okay.
The Tappan Zee Bridge is old. We knew probably the day we built it, we could have predicted that it needed to be rebuilt in about 60 years, which is, I think, about where we're at now. And because there was a failure to plan, there was a failure of leadership, for the next 50 years, people from upstate are going to be driving jobs in New York City across the bridge without a high occupancy vehicle lane and without a mass transit lane. And now we just learned the Chamber of Commerce, of which I'm a member, just put out a warning that, in fact, we can't afford that bridge. And so they're going to increase the fees by 40%. Why is that important? Because we've been trading for 400 years with Canada, and they're not going to stand for a 40% increase in the cost of crossing that critical bridge. And so they're going to start going east to west across the 401 and over the Ambassador Bridge in Michigan to reach our heartland. And so my proposal would allow a private entrepreneur to use private capital so that when the government fails to plan, an entrepreneur could say, I will build that mass transit lane, I just want to profit from it. This is working in other parts of the country. We don't do it. There's no law in place to allow it in New York. I want to introduce the legislation to make that a reality. Why does it matter to us? because it is absolutely critical to continuing our trade with Canada. All that commerce needs to continue flowing through this district. And so I'm committed to addressing those problems well ahead of time, sir.
Karen, you want to respond?
I'm committed to not allowing the state of New York to use $10 million to rebuild a stretch of railroad to a closed-down paper mill. That's what I'm committed to. And that's what's happening in the Regional Economic Development Grant Program. $10 million. Let's talk about the $175,000 for the chicken plucker truck. Okay, and that's now the FDA has decided that the chicken plucker truck does not meet the specifications that it's supposed to meet. So the truck they ended up getting, but they can't do the hauler on the back of it because it's not going to be allowed. So now we have people who have a $75,000 truck that they were supposed to, that they got paid for by our tax dollars, and they're not able to actually use their business. Okay, so that's what I'm committed to. It's nonsense. It's not even common sense. I mean, it's ridiculous that our tax dollars are being put into these types of situations when we have enormous amounts of debt in the state, $870 million to mimic a failed economic plan at the federal level. That's what I'm committed to. I just think all of that's nonsense.
I'd like to take the last couple minutes and just refocus the question to Cumberland Head and the town of Plattsburgh. And what we as residents on Cumberland Head have been subjected to for the last, for this regime that's in charge now. And that's Mr. Bassett and company.
Yes.
But we have a real concern about this because it seems as if we are being pickpocketed every time we turn around. More taxes on every issue, projects that are not disclosed fully, projects that are using antiquated numbers in terms of projected costs, projects that we're never told about, that we're never given the opportunity to vote on. Information that we seek through the town, that's public information, is denied. What do you think, the two of you, since you have a lot of expertise in government, are we on the right road here with Cumberland Head Taxpayers Association?
Oh my God.
Do we need to have some more direction? Do you think that you would be willing to support us in the future when we need a voice to reach out to the town and let them know that we're totally disgusted with their operation? Can't get any more plain than that. I'm really concerned about this. Being a pensioner and fixed income, I mean, I have a decent pension, at least it was 5 years ago. It's not that way anymore. These were strapped into town by unions. They get a 3.5% to 4% raise every year. They're buying mats that cost $900 a piece. They're embroidering their shirts, which is very nice. I like that. That's kind of nice. I like to have an embroidered shirt for all our maintenance people.
I understand
It's
that
gotten
my
to-
flowers and the weeds can go around too.
The weeds.
I understand they're beautifying the area, but nobody trims it, so that beauty is now submerged in weeds.
Everything is thrown up by weeds. So they make an effort and it goes by the wayside. That's our concern. And I'd like to get some, before you leave tonight, because I'd like to wrap this up. We've been here since 6:30 or 4. You've had a full day and we started at 4. And we really appreciate you being here and sharing your thoughts with us, both of you. And maybe you can give us some insight. My sense is we're on the right track. What else can we do to get the attention of this board who is, seems to be, missed the message that they're working for us, that they're elected by us? That's the question. So,
Okay, well, can I?
you want to start? Go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, you are not unlike many groups that I've seen throughout this entire district. They don't call themselves the Taxpayers Association, but all these conversations are being had everywhere. So it's amazing, and I suspect, not suspect, I know this after being talked to from, with you for the last hour and a half, you're all incredibly intelligent people. And the reason that you formed this group is because you know what's best for you. I also do suspect, however, that you're interested in the least amount of state government in your life possible, and the least amount of local government in your life possible. So as a representative to the state assembly, I don't think that my job would be to be an ambassador and to help you negotiate the process to move forward, because you're gonna know what's best for you. If there's an ethics situation, if there's something that you think that you need to have done at the state level, that would be my job. One of the things that I want to do is I want clear communication. I'm sure many of you remember years ago when John McHugh was in this position. Chris Orloff. When Chris Orloff was in this position, he actually sent out literature to all of us and asked us to comment on upcoming pieces of legislation. I actually responded to every single one of those that I got, and John McHugh did the same thing. But that hasn't happened for a really long time. I think communication is critical. But the other thing that I also think is that it's also my job to make sure I know what's going on with you. And it's not my job to sit around and wait for you to call me. And I think that's what happens too. I mean, I would be responsible for Clinton County, Franklin County, and 4 townships in St. Lawrence County. My job would be to make sure I have people sitting in meetings all over the place, finding out what is going on in my county. That's my job. That's what you're paying me for. Whether it's me, whether it's a member of the staff, whether it's a volunteer, whether it's contacting you and asking for the minutes to your meeting so that I'm abreast of the situation, and then be an ambassador for you to negotiate your way through the state. I don't think you want me or the state hovering inside you. I think you want us available for you when you need us, and that would be my role.
Jack, I think it's really important that we do away with shoddy legislation. When any person supports legislation or co-sponsors it, and then has the audacity to tell voters, well, I didn't really read it, and as a result, you have an unintended consequence, and I think there's a real solution is to get rid of it. So it's important that we put forth quality legislation. It's also important that we address the real problems at the state level with the legislation that we propose. Because I think that helps prevent unintended consequences as well. I'm encouraged, as a resident of the town of Plattsburgh, I know that Cumberland Head has traditionally been one of the more active areas of the town. If there's something going on in Cumberland Head, we're more likely, say, at the planning board, where I'm a member, to see people than any other time. But I must say, more often than not, Debbie Blake is the only one in town hall. And a government of the people, by the people, and for the people requires people. And so I'm encouraged, seriously though, I'm encouraged that you're taking this step. I would like to see more of it, and I would love to see, since Nyla is no longer able to make it like she used to, I think it would be marvelous if more people also participated at the local level. I think that would be wonderful.
Jeff, can I just say one last
Okay,
thing?
sure.
So many people think that we need to do. I think we need to undo. Okay, and instead of more legislation, I think we need to take a look at the legislation that we have and get rid of it and clean it up. So I'm not for sitting down and drafting all sorts of pieces of legislation. I'm for looking at what we've got, see what's reasonable, take what isn't off the books, and undoing. And getting that with input from all of you, and that comes from communication and from being visible and from being active.
Other questions?
Yeah, just one. Great enthusiasm, great ideas, but when you get down to Albany, how are you going to accomplish this? How are you going to get other assembly members with you? Turn your back to the lobbyists. How are you not going to be the outcast? We just don't want you to go down there and spin your wheels. How are you going to accomplish what you're saying?
My turn this
Your
time?
turn.
Okay, 30 seconds or less.
Bill, there are a couple of things. I mentioned one earlier. You really are your reputation. And so I believe if I approach the job and am determined to build a reputation from day one for jobs and growth, that will help. The other thing, too, it has to do with what Mr. Mudd brought up. So often with our legislators, we hear them and they talk about things as us versus them. I've heard them over and over again. Janet has said this many times. They just don't understand the North Country. One of the reasons I use the example of the Tappan Zee Bridge is because, in point of fact, good policy is good for the North Country and downstate. And so I think that we have to change our approach to problem solving. I believe rather than continuing down the old path of saying, you know, we're so different and so on and so forth, I believe it's important to say, this is good for me for these reasons, but guess what? It's going to work for you too. And I believe I can do that. I've done it all my life. And so I plan to actually continue that approach and I'll do it.
One more question?
No,
Yeah,
Well, yeah.
You know what I'm going to say? Okay. Well, I think I've clearly demonstrated over most of my adult life and as a professional that I'm willing to stand alone if I have to. I think that I'm also not naive. I recognize that the majority of the assembly is made up of people who are of a different persuasion. Not only that, you know, not only politically, but also geographically. I happen to come from Long Island, and I happen to be very comfortable with people from Long Island and from the city area, so the learning curve in working with people is not going to be huge for me. What I would like to say is that I'm not afraid to take a hard stand, and I'm also not afraid to make relationships. Everything is about relationships. Everything we do is about a system of relationships. My effectiveness in this job will be about creating and cultivating a great relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that I give away the farm through bipartisanship. That doesn't necessarily mean that I allow them to put forth their agenda and move it forward and stand back and say nothing. Okay, so, you know, primarily my goal would be to do what it is that somebody like Bob Brown does. I mean, Bob Brown works for environmental conservation issues, and he goes down there and he schleps himself, sorry, that's good, Long Island word. That man moves himself through the entire assembly, and he goes door to door to door until he can find the people that he needs to pull together of all ilk. He doesn't care. To put together whatever great piece of legislation he's going to enact that will be supported by your local assembly person with regards to conservation. Why is Bob Brown doing that? Isn't that what we pay our assembly people to do? You know, why are we bringing a lobbyist up from this area to go down and talk about issues that affect all of us in the North Country? I would think that would be my job. So I think there's a difference between bipartisanship and a difference between building relationships. I'm not willing to negotiate my surrender.
One more, that's it.
I just got one last question and close. These people here, based on what I've heard tonight, sit here and they're concerned about maybe losing their retirement. Is that true? Yeah, either one of you.
Well,
We have no guarantees.
we have no guarantees,
Yeah.
right?
But I mean, that's out there in front of you, right? Huh?
Sure.
Well, there's a possibility because we don't have guaranteed pensions, yes.
Okay. And I think that's horrible to be in that situation. But yet, on the other hand, and Jack made a point earlier, because he said as a retiree on a fixed income, and when you first retired, I've been retired since '98. When you first retire, your income seems to be very decent. But based on what this moron has done to us, with the gasoline prices, with grocery prices and everything else that's going up, and now, let's talk about Cumberland Head, because my property just went up $88,000, the assessment,
Assessment,
and they will not back off of it. They want to come out and look at my house, they want to come in my house. I said, no. They said, well, wait a minute, because I went in showing them where my house was not valued at that. And they said, well, you let this person in your house, why won't you let me in your house? I said, you're the government, and I don't trust you. I got an issue. But here's my point. My question was this, and I pose this to everyone in this room. Do you think it's fair that a person that has worked all their entire life, put their kids through college with no help from the government, and one day they can live in a nice home, but they can't afford to live in it because they can't afford to pay the taxes? Is that right?
No, but now we have a guaranteed increase in your taxes of 2% every single year. Because the 2% tax cap is not really guaranteed 2%.
My issue is that right, that you can't live in a home that you have, because what they're doing, or at least this is my opinion, my wealth is in my home, and they're taxing me on that. Everything I do to my home increases my tax value. I have friends that's big into auto racing and stuff, put all kinds of money into their cars. They're not taxed on that. They either live with somebody else, or they live in a dump.
You know, sir.
That's their choice. But I'm being penalized because I choose to live in a nice home.
I agree with you.
And I want to tell you something, I've had it, and what I'd like to do is know what can we do to get somebody's attention?
To give somebody what?
To get their attention, because it's wrong.
I've got an answer for you.
What?
Form an organization like the one right here tonight.
Get involved.
I
Get
hope,
involved, and you get people and your neighbors to get involved and to start speaking up, and we can start putting this on our platform in terms of the issues. I really believe that.
And this,
sincerely.
it extrapolates out over so much more than just this. If you take a look at the family farm in this area, and what's happening to the family farm and happening to farmers, and the lifeblood of our entire United States. I mean, these people work 365 days a year, 7 days a week with 3 meals on our table. Their growing season is 25% shorter, their property values are 60% lower than their counterparts across the entire nation. They get 50% taxed higher, 50% than anybody else across the nation. We're losing that also. So this whole issue of taxes, it goes so much further than that. You know, we're losing family farms all over the place, and this whole district is, that's all I've done is listen to people talk about taxes and how it is strangling them on so many levels, people that will never retire, sir. They will never see what you or I will have because their life is different, you know, because they're
and you know what, and I realize that, and I don't even think my own kids will be able to have a life like my wife and I.
We often forget that we are actually the first nation in the history of the world that allowed ordinary citizens, or as a matter of course, to own properties. And so property tax is one of the most insipid taxes on the planet. And growth states in America don't have property tax at all. That's where I would like to go.
I got a very close, one thing, I got a very close friend of mine that lives on a yacht, goes from Detroit, Michigan, which is all over the United States, goes from Detroit, Michigan to Florida every year and pays no school tax.
Okay.
Who's smart?
Let's wrap it up.